Welcome to Bitter Reality Brewing. This is the top 10 tips, tricks, recommendations, hacks, whatever you want to call them. Don't forget, like, subscribe, keep sharing. It's been huge. Slowing down a little bit right now. I think people are kind of burn out from the end of the year and starting the new year, but keep sharing. I definitely appreciate it. It's huge. Before I jump in, like I said, I'll share whatever I'm drinking commercially. I just found this brewery last night. I was up in Fernandina Beach taking care of some family-related issues, and First Love Brewing, Fernandina Beach. I got Ramble on Rye, or Rye, whatever, but it's a rye amber ale. I got a red IPA, yeah, it's kind of been a theme. And then I got a double IPA, really, really nice. I've had a sample of all, but this one definitely stood out. And the red IPA was pretty nice too. The double didn't taste too much, so I'll have to try that one. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, not real sure. It's quite a bit of beer there. So basically our big focus today is gonna be all about high ABV beers, and things related to high ABV beers. So all top 10 is on that. I jump around a lot to make sure that I'm covering everybody's, how do you say, what they like, what they don't like, what they care for, what they don't care for. I'm trying to make sure I take care of everybody out there. Got a few props here, but I'll explain as we get to those points. So number one, aging beer experiment to try. Yes, try aging your beer. Even if you have no intention of aging a certain beer, this is it's a dry stout, and it's modestly dry, but it was called a smooth stout. Super, super smooth, and I haven't noticed a lot of changes. It's going on about 2 years. It has gotten a little smoother, but not much. A little more drinkable, even though it was incredibly drinkable in the first place. I had somebody who kind of questioned me that it was homebrew. They're like, there's no way. This is the smoothest stout I ever tasted. So I pulled up the recipe and it said smooth stout, and they were like, dude, too cool. So I know a lot of you know this, Founders KBS. Yeah, very expensive beer, and thank God they brought the price back down, but this is from 2015. I still have 2 left from 2015, and I guarantee it's gonna be just as good, if not better, than back in 2015 when it first came out. So what you wanna do is basically take your beer. If you're kegging, then you know what? Grab yourself a counter pressure filler, like tap flow or whatever. Just get something, tap cooler, that's what it's called. And bottle off 3 to 6 beers, put them in the back of your fridge. If you're living up north and it's nice and cool in the basement, and I'm not saying freezing, but cool, put them there, just store them away, forget about them. A couple months down the road, pop one open, try it out. A few more months, what you're gonna find is a couple things. First of all, don't do it with IPAs or pale ales. They're usually kind of mellow and they're not gonna be as good, at least in my point of view or my perception. But stouts, porters, dark beers, they age incredibly well. A lot of the heavier beers, your triples, your doubles, golden ales, high ABVs, they all usually age very, very well. And what you'll notice, even sometimes you'll have a flavor start to become more pronounced that you didn't even know was there, or something else is a little more subdued, but it just kind of mellows, and it's a good thing. I mean, a lot of those high beers that are high ABV, even especially if you got what I call the fossil fuel, you're tasting alcohol, that will definitely come down and you won't notice it nearly as much. I actually had a Saison, which is not something I would recommend you age, but it was at 5.4% ABV. I had a ton of them, and I found one sitting in the back of my fridge from over 3 years ago, and I was like, pour it, oh, OMG, I want it more. It's making me want to brew that beer this year. It was so good, and it hadn't really gotten any better in my eyes, but it was still just as good as it was back when I brewed it, and I was very excited. So something to consider and something to try. You know, it's one more thing you can do. Well, if you're doing your normal routine, doesn't take any extra effort, really. So number 2, consider additional oxygenation or aeration when you're brewing a really high gravity beer. So let's say you're brewing something in the neighborhood of 1.100 original gravity. Either add pure oxygen, which I don't have, but I have been considering adding and buying the little adapter, or something which I do actually do, and I do it for other reasons, but you can do this, and you can check Brewlosophy. They did something like this as a test. But oxygenate your wort after you put your yeast, then do it 12 hours later, and then do it 24 hours later, and then don't do it anymore. Stop there. One of the things I'll do is sometimes if I see my yeast isn't really kicking at about 18 hours, and it doesn't look like it's doing what I think close to the 24-hour point, yeah, I will oxygenate the hell out of it. and usually it'll take off after that and I'm all good. So those, I will find too that the original gravities will drop very quickly on the ones that I've re-aerated at that 24 or sooner mark, versus ones I don't will be a little more modest in the way they come down. So just something to consider, something to be aware of. I definitely wouldn't be putting pure oxygen in 3 times, but if you've got either pure oxygen, great. If not, try aerating twice or 3 times, and it will help give it that yeast a little extra oxygen, a little more air, so it can kind of take off. Also, number 3, if you're brewing a high gravity beer, and that's our theme, if you're brewing a high gravity beer, also consider pitching up to twice your normal yeast. You'll see this even in American Home Brewing Association. They'll show recipes and sometimes they're really high, and the brewer or the person who wrote that recipe and brewed that beer will tell you 2 packets or 2 this, 2 that. White Labs, I've seen them where they're like 2. Well, of course, they're selling the yeast. I want to say it was Bell's, another one out there that had their own, one of their recipes for one of their beers that they brew, and it said 2 packets. You want that extra yeast, make sure it's going to take off. If you're not going to do that, try to get a yeast that you know is going to really accelerate in high original gravities, such as a Kveik yeast. The Norwegian yeasts do amazingly well, most of them, not all of them probably, but most of them, at least from what I've read, do really well on really high, high original gravities. We'll just go there because the ABV isn't really there until after it's been fermented. Number 4. If you're brewing a really high gravity beer, I was going to say consider, but don't consider, just do it. Get yourself a blow off tube. If you got a bubbler like this, shove the tube directly in, run it into a big old mason jar, put some water in it, a little star sand if you want to make sure, there's no backflow, hopefully, and just create a bubbler. Just go straight to a bubbler, don't worry about it. That way you don't go to bed, wake up the next morning, and of course it's all over the place. I've seen too many pictures, and I think we all see those from time to time. So, number 5, if brewing a really high gravity beer, also take into consideration that it most likely will have a slightly higher final gravity, unless your yeast is really tolerant and a very high ABV, and on top of that, that it actually, can attenuate. If you're doing a dark beer, a lot of your adjuncts are not going to be as fermentable. If you're adding lactose, it's not going to be as fermentable. So of course, well, it's not fermentable at all. But basically your final gravity is going to be much higher. So also, as that yeast hits what I call terminal velocity, which means it's hitting the max of its ability on ABV. So it's rated for 12 ABV and you're sitting at 11. Yeah, it's going to start dying off at a much faster rate, and you're not going to have as many cells sitting there doing their job. And it may die off before it's finished because it's right at that edge. Now, if you've got a 14% yeast and you're doing 12, it's probably going to get up there, kill that before it starts to break down a little more efficient at that. So just keep that in mind. Number 6. This, I won't say so much a high ABV, but it will help you get to the higher ABV or to the heavier mouthfeel, basically. If your mash temperatures are on the higher side, 154 and around that neighborhood, you're going to get more alpha amylase enzymes, and those are going to be more producing a more moderately fermentable wort and will yield a fuller bodied beer, a little bit more mouthfeel. Now, if you're doing a lower temperature, 148, 152 or below, in that area, you're going to get beta amylase. That's what I like. I like beta amylase because I like very dry beers. But the beta amylase is going to produce much more fermentable wort, and it's going to be much more highly attenuated when you're adding those types of yeast that can have a higher attenuation. They're just going to munch away and eat up all that sugar. So you're going to end up with a much drier beer and actually a little slightly thinner beer, unless it's got some of those things that, like we said before, are not as fermentable. So, number 7, adding spirits or liquor directly to your beer. Yes, you can do this, and some of them may have some sugar in them and may have some additional fermentation, but they will leave behind flavors, some more than others. But you could do something like a rum cream ale, an amaretto porter, a bourbon rye IPA. Yeah, you thought I was going to say bourbon stout. Yeah, that'll work too. But those are some of the things that you can add. Now, on top of that, let's say you have a cream ale and it's kind of got a little harshness to it. You could add something like a orange liqueur. So it would be an orange cream ale. Sounds kind of cool, even though I'm not a big orange fan. Orange cream ale. And that will help hide or mask some of the harshness or maybe a bitter flavor that's not supposed to be there. So sometimes you can actually add a liqueur to beer to cover it. I really like, there's one out there, I think it's Kentucky Ale or something like that, and they have a cream ale that's been aged in bourbon barrels. So it's a very mild beer that's got a nice rich backbone, and it's kind of cool. Instead of the high ones with the high backbone on top, it's too much sometimes. Number 8, adding spirits or rye or bourbon, things like that, without actually adding alcohol to your beer. I know, and you're going, you talking about wood chips? No. They make these cool little things that you can flavor things like vodka and make it taste like rye, but you got rye whiskey, you got Kentucky bourbon, and yes, I bought a few because I want to try adding them to beer. So I can add a rye whiskey flavoring and have a rye whiskey taste to my beer without adding rye whiskey. Same thing with the bourbon. So something, and they make a lot of those, but that's just a cool way to add some flavor to a beer or something that you didn't really add any rye to. Suddenly it tastes like you put a crap load of rye in there. Also, number 9, when adding bourbon, and we've been down this road with chocolate, but when adding bourbon or even barrel aging in a bourbon barrel, sometimes that bourbon just doesn't stand out, and you're like, man, I know it's there, but I just can't taste it very much, or it's very mild. Consider adding a little vanilla, and that's my Trader Joe's pure bourbon vanilla extract. Add just a little bit of vanilla, and it will help the bourbon kind of stand out more, and just that subtle hint of vanilla in there. And if you've ever had bourbon, which I'm hoping a lot of you have at least tried it, you know it's got a lot of vanilla on it. So that little bit of vanilla can help that bourbon really stand out. Same thing with caramel. People who love caramel, or caramel, however you want to say it, put a little vanilla in whatever they have the caramel or caramel in, it'll stand out drastically. Number 10. This one, I kind of got a little bonus thing here for you. And you already know this, but basically if you want to add certain flavors, you can put them in vodka and soak them and get those flavors. And there's different ways of doing it. A lot of people want to do it right now. How many days? Well, you're not going to get that much flavoring if you do a couple days. So if you have planned to soak your own vanilla, you might want to start now and give it weeks, months, or even a year or more. So that way that really becomes infused with that flavoring that you want to add, and whatever flavoring you want to add. And here's a little bonus tip for flavoring, okay? And I'll grab these out of my garden. I got a couple jalapenos, some red, some green. These are all fresh jalapenos. Well, I've actually never brewed a beer with peppers in them. And I was hoping to get some hybrid jalapenos, which have no heat, last year, and I didn't get them, but it is what it is. So what you can do is we'll say this jalapeno. You're not sure how much heat you want in that beer, but you want the flavor, you just don't want all that heat. So, slicing a little bit and leaving it in there for a week, well, it's gonna get hotter over time. At least that's how most peppers do, unless you take it out and, kind of restrict it. But another trick you can do is that you can take something like this, slice it up, put it in a thing of vodka, let it sit for a week, then take that and drip a little bit of the vodka in, let it saturate the keg, give it a little bit, try it. You want to kick the heat up, you can add more. This will allow you to add and bring your heat and your flavor up slowly without putting too much in, knowing that, well, wait a minute, now my beer is so hot, I need to eat sour cream after every sip. Yeah, it's not enjoyable. So, and once you get good at it, that may be the way you want to do it every time. If you're just super brave and you just want to dice a bunch up, throw it in there and go, I don't care how it comes out, I love the heat and I'll drink it all day long. Go for it. I usually like my beer with something spicy. I don't necessarily like them together. It's just me. So if for any reason you're near Fernandina Beach, check out First Love. It's not sponsored. It's just somewhere I went and tried and liked a lot and had never heard of them before. We were having dinner and I just looked them up I looked up a different brewery in Fernandina and found First Love by pure accident. So thanks again for joining us here at Bitter Reality Brewing. Don't forget, like, subscribe, share. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.